You may be seated. I started my summer CPE program this week. I was convinced that I should do this hospice chaplaincy program, that it would be meaningful and really help me to grow. And while I'm sure that those things are true, and I will experience them throughout the summer, it's going to be a very hard summer. My basic job is to walk with people through the process of dying and to provide care and presence to the patients and their families. Clearly, not the easiest job in the world. This week was orientation, and they told us the classic line to help us care for ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. It's a fairly common phrase in service and caring jobs. It basically means that if you're going to make sure someone else is doing okay, you have to be okay. You can't care for people if you're exhausted and burnt out all the time. But of course, our cups aren't always empty. Life is really more of an ebb and flow. Our fullness changes over time, even day by day, based on what we experience. I feel like we spend very little time talking about what happens when we do have full cups, though. We spend a lot more time talking about how to get them full when they're empty. I think it often feels so nice when we finally have those full cups that we just want to keep it all inside, or we're worried that our cups won't be full later on, so we have to save it up. And pop psychology, lately, has been very focused on how we fill our cups, how we can take care of ourselves, how we can be the best versions of ourselves, how we can break all of our bad habits in 30 days. It's become quite a self-focused time, trying to get us to improve, to be the best possible people we can be. And all of those things are important and meaningful, in a place. But we can't constantly live critiquing ourselves and reshaping ourselves, because it turns out that the more time we spend trying to make ourselves better, and we spend thinking about how we could improve, the more likely we are to be depressed. But I've noticed that if we're constantly looking at problems in ourselves and in other people and the world, it's kind of like we end up with a magnifying glass too close and end up missing the beauty going on in the world around us. We get stuck in the improvement mindset, and instead of appreciation that recognizes with joy how far we've come, the good things in others, the world around, we just end up nitpicking instead. It's pretty easy to get stuck in the cycle, especially when there are so many painful and harmful things going on in the world. Or maybe sometimes we think that we're pouring out into other people. We think our cup is full and we're helping all the other people fill up theirs too, when actually we aren't really doing much of anything. Or even worse, we're critiquing people to help them grow, like we do to ourselves, but it isn't actually very helpful to them. Maybe sometimes we say open hearts in our motto, but the way that we treat people is more like the locked doors that the kids were hoping to open. And our actions don't reflect our mottos. But open hearts is kind of an unclear term. People throw it around a good bit. So I'm going to give you the definition that I'm working from. It's based on the gospel, where Jesus is asked how his followers will know it's him after he leaves and ascends into heaven. Jesus, how are we going to know that the words coming to us are you and not somebody else's? And he basically tells them that instead of looking for signs of whether it's him or not, all they need to do is to love him by keeping the commandments of God. And then he and the Creator will live inside their hearts. Seems fairly simple. It's by keeping the commandments of God, by loving God and our neighbor, that our hearts slowly begin to open. First, there's room for God, and then God works to slowly expand us even more, finding room for family and friends, those around us, maybe even those that we don't like, those who have harmed us, Even when we think there's no room left inside of us, God will still find ways to multiply and provide for all. The space that God finds in our hearts allows us to embody Jesus and the ways that he opened his heart to the world, loving all people, whoever they were. And it isn't just that those people sit in our hearts and we occasionally think about them and send out some nice thoughts sometimes. It's that we have compassion for them. Our hearts break open to the suffering that they experience, and we try to find ways to be with them through that pain. Being open-hearted is being open to the pain of the world, letting it come to us. The hardest part is that, like Jesus, we don't just leave the world to its pain. We don't just let it come in and sit. We're called to the work of alleviating that pain. In CPE, we learned about palliative care. It seeks to make those in pain more comfortable. A lot of times, we think this is just for the dying process. But realistically, we should be getting palliative care our whole lives. We have a knee replacement. Palliative care helps with pain and rehab. We catch the flu. Palliative care helps with the symptoms. More broadly, we're attacked by unjust policies and cruel people who seek to hurt us. When the weight of the world is too much, when we experience loss or major life transitions, palliative care, that compassion and open-heartedness, picks us up off the ground and finds ways to soothe and heal our wounds. Opening up to the pain of the world is not a comfortable thing. You will, of course, feel some of that pain yourself. You want to stop the other person's pain so badly that it will often hurt you. But it's been shown that the inverse reaction of what we think is true. While it will occasionally hurt to be open-hearted, it also makes us stronger and more resilient. It strengthens us to be able to open our hearts even more instead of closing them off. It's a bit like the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. The more people are there, the more worried we get that we won't have enough to go around. We won't be able to provide for everything that they need. But God is able to use a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish to go a lot further than we could ever imagine. The more we try to open ourselves up to others, the more love we find there, the more there is to go around. It's like a never-ending fountain that always pours into us because God is in our hearts, constantly filling us up. There is always love enough to share. We don't just get this way overnight, though. And mostly I think the evangelicals make it seem a little too easy. We don't just pray one day to accept Jesus into our hearts, and poof, you're magically an open-hearted, caring, resilient, perfect person. It takes a lot of time for Jesus to start pushing the edges of our hearts to expand them, for God to start clearing away the cobwebs in the corners that we don't use so that there's more space. And then we have to practice, and it takes a lot. The disciples all struggled with it. Christians through the years have struggled with it, including John Wesley, who was convinced that he was unworthy and was struggling with his faith and was on the verge of giving up, until one of his Moravian mentors urged him to continue and told him, preach faith till you have it, and then because you have it, preach faith. There's almost a fake it till you make it mentality to opening your heart, or a try to open your heart to love, and when you love, open your heart. There will be many times when you just pretend your heart is open. Days when you pretend you're a lot more loving than you feel, going through the motions. But the more you set your mind to feeling like a loving person, feeling that you love others, the easier it gets to get into the habit of really believing and working on it. Maybe you start with the little simple things, donating some money to a good cause. Soon you might start to write letters of support maybe go to some marches, then you start to question the systems that put the people that you're loving in those dire situations and unhealthy cycles in the first place. So you start advocating and walking with those people in pain, finding ways to hold their hands and to hear their stories. Being open-hearted often makes you change the way you live. Your habits become different. Your disposition changes. You are a changed person. Sometimes it takes a momentous occasion for our hearts to begin the opening process. For many, that occasion is an almost shipwreck, as it was for John Wesley and later John Newton. Newton is the author of many popular hymns, including Amazing Grace. He lived a life filled with lack of restraint and impatience, as his early years were described. After a tough time scraping by for a merchant, he set sail with another company, but his ship got caught in a terrible storm. Out of fear, he converted to Christianity, though he says later that this didn't immediately change his behavior or his attitude. But slowly, he began to understand the gospel. He changed his lifestyle and his career. He'd been involved in the slave trade, but over time, he saw the evils of it and eventually became an abolitionist and then an Anglican priest. After starting Bible studies in his home and writing many poems and famous hymns. Paul also encounters a picture of an open-hearted person in the form of Lydia that Don read for us. Paul has come to the area to baptize and spread the gospel. Lydia and her family are some of the first baptized. In a moment of reciprocity, Acts says that her heart was open so that she invited Paul and Silas to stay with her family, to thank them for starting this change in her. Once our hearts are really opened, like Lydia's, we can't help but let all of that love out. We no longer have empty cups. We are overflowing from the love and grace of God. An open heart has room to take in more people because God always finds ways for us to expand, so that we not only have the capacity to love everyone, but also that we are so full that we overflow into the world, supporting those in need, inviting even more of the hurting in, and sharing grace and peace with all. With our hearts open, we can't help but have our cups overflow into others in the world. We're no longer worried about saving it up or bottling it in. We're filled with God's grace, and the only thing to do with that is to pour it into the world. As we are filled constantly by God, so too we fill others, breaking open more hearts, finding more room for all for the love that overflows from us. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.